Oh my god, we are back with a brand new car modeling tutorial. Apologies to the subscribers who've been craving some new car modeling content. Welcome to anyone new who's found the channel for the first time. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for future videos. So it's been a minute, but I'm back for at least one more car modeling tutorial. This time we're going to have a look at a Dodge Challenger Demon. This car's an absolute beast. I chose this car because obviously it's pretty nuts, but mainly the body lines and everything is fairly simple. So for those who are just starting out, we may find it quite good. A good base, good starting point for 3D modeling and all that good stuff. I've got Autodesk Maya 2020 open. I've got my blueprints loaded in, so we're good. Before we do start, I did make a Maya blueprint video quite a while ago, I think about maybe 3 years ago. So if you're wanting, if you're not sure how to put blueprints in, I recommend you go back, have a look at that video. If you do want me to do a more updated video on that, just let me know in the comments. We'll have a look at that. I found the blueprints that I've got here with a simple Google search. They're not too hard to find. There was a lot of blueprints for the Hellcat, which is cool, but I prefer the Dodge Demon. I think the Demon's a little bit more aggressive looking, especially with the wide arches that we've got here. So have a look around on Google. These ones here, they're not the most high res, but they should be fine for now. But what you also need to remember is that when it comes to 3D modeling a vehicle or a car or really anything that's fairly realistic at all, you kind of want to make sure that you have a bunch of reference images. These are probably just as important as the actual blueprints themselves, so make sure you've got plenty of those as you're going through, so that you can make sure that everything that you're trying to do is as photorealistic as possible. Apologies for the yellow, hopefully it's not going to be too crazy, but yes, it's not looking too bad. We'll see how we go. Might have to mute it down a little bit. So I suppose we should make a start. Firstly, before we do start, if you're using Maya 2020 or any, I think maybe 2016 onwards or something, make sure you've got your multi-sample and anti-alias and just here selected. Just makes it all a little bit easier to see, especially the lines that you've got here. And when it comes to adding in the geometry and things, it looks a lot cleaner as we go through. So what I'm going to do here is, if you've been with us before, I start from the same spot all the time. If you haven't, I normally start with the wheel arch here, and the reason that I do that is because obviously modeling using squares and triangles and things like that, it's a lot harder to make a curve with squares than it is to start with an already created curve. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to form the whole arch, and then I'm going to work around the front, up over the hood here, up the bonnet, up onto the roof, down the back of the car, and then we'll probably start in the same spot on the rear, move our way around the back, and then we kind of just meet in the middle as we go. Normally I try to rush through these, but I'm going to take my time with this series, so apologies if you're going to follow along. I will be taking my time, make sure that it's covered for all those who are just starting out as well. I'm going to try and keep the videos to around 20 minutes per episode, so hopefully maybe 10-15 episodes we should get something half decent. So what I'm going to start with here has actually been removed off the main shelf when it comes to the main poly modeling stuff here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to create Polygon primitives. I'm going to go down here until we find the pipe. I'm going to bring that in. I'm then going to position this pipe roughly to where I want it to be. I'm going to use my channel box editor to rotate this by 90 degrees. And I'm going to bring this over here. Now what I'm actually going to do in my main viewport here is I'm actually going to hide the image planes, and I'm just going to be working with the main view of the car. I'm going to be using the image planes mainly in our side views down here. So I'm going to go to shading and hit X-ray so that we can see through this. And we're going to bring it up here. We're going to need to start to think about the size. So the best way to do this is inside of our channel box editor again. It can be found by clicking the box up here. I'm going to go over the inputs, click on polypipe, and it's going to give us some options inside here to adjust. So firstly, we're going to want to adjust the radius. I'm just going to put in some random figures inside here just until we get something roughly that we want. I think 0.6 is looking okay. So realistically what we're wanting to do is just match the curve that we the best that we can here. In terms of thickness, obviously we're going to want to dial that down. Let's try 0.05. It's pretty close. Maybe go 0.04. 0.03. It's just a little bit of trial and error until we kind of get this nailed, but I think we're looking quite good there. The reason we want to do this using our inputs here is because as soon as we start scaling and moving this, it's going to start distorting, and means we're not going to be able to add quick subdivisions in here should we wish to. So I like to get my height nailed inside the inputs here as best I can, and then I can fine tune that afterwards with any kind of scaling or rotations and things should I need to. Now we've got this in place, we're going to want to get this roughly in place. I'm going to go X-ray in my front view as well. We're going to want to get this roughly in the right spot here too. And what we want is we want to kind of plan our model from this point, especially our path around the front here, so we can see that we've got a kind of front splitter down here at the bottom of the front bumper. We've got this kind of intake at the bottom here, which we want to kind of match up. We also have this section here for where the bumper kind of goes off and tails off up into the bonnet. There's so many ways that we could go with this. I think 20 subdivisions should be fine for now. We can add a few in should we need to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down right click on the poly pipe, if it would let me. Let me just go back in here. I'm going to select my faces, and I'm just going to delete all of the lower faces down here. So we're going to be left with a rough shape here. And what I'm going to do in my side view, I'm going to hold down right click and select the vertex, and I'm going to try my best to kind of align what we have in terms of the geometry. I'm going to rotate this around just so that this line here is going to match with the line for the bumper there. We've got a few portions in here that we can edit as well, so I'm just going to bring these in using the vertex here. But what we want to also do is want to make sure that we're maintaining a nice curve as we do this as well. Let's just bring these down. I'm just going to go through because what we want to do is whenever we're modeling anything really is like your base kind of starting point, you want it to be as clean as possible. So we'll take a little bit of time to do this. We'll maybe actually bring in an extra one in here. I'm going to try and keep them as evenly spaced as possible as well. I'm just going to grab my edge here. I'm going to hit Control E. And I'm just going to bring this down for the side skirt as well whilst we're here. I think for now with this section it's fine, so I'm going to remove this edge here. So we can see here I've got two faces inside this point. I've got these ones that are going up and around here, and then I've got one down for the side skirt on this side as well. And we've got those roughly in the right spot as we go around. So now what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to go into our front view, and we're going to want to try now to follow the kind of curve that we have going around for this wheel arch here. So we're going to probably need to utilize both views at this point because we don't want to make we want to make sure that we're not selecting something on that back side there. So I'm going to hold down my vertex here. Just bring that in a little bit more just to maintain that curve a bit better. So I'm going to select my vertices in this view here, and then I'm going to pull them into position using my front view. So again, select and then pull into position here. And the reason we're going to do this is because one big mistake a lot of people make when it first comes to vehicle modeling and many other forms of 3D modeling is that very few surfaces are completely flat, especially on cars. So we want to make sure that as we're going around here that we're maintaining all of these initial curves instantly, and we're not going to be in a position where we're going to have a completely straight side. We want to obviously maintain a curve. Now it's always hard to see the curve behind the wheel because we can see here now that the wheel is going to be coming along here. We can kind of actually see at the start, so we can kind of see that it's actually there. So we've got a little bit more of a kind of an extra curve around in the rear part of the arch. You can kind of follow that line, but then when it comes to this point here, we're kind of blind. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow, for the most part, this curvature of the front. I'm going to assume that's the same. We can check our reference images if we wanted to, but I think for now that should be looking good. And then of course we have our side skirt, which is probably a little bit flatter. So for now we'll have a look there. If I do check my references, see, we can actually see on this image here that it's not actually completely flat. It does continue to curve underneath there. So let's do that as well. So let's just take that in. Maybe not quite as much. Let's bring this out a little bit more. Something like that. So we can see now in our front view that we've got a nice curve that's going to go around that portion there for us. Now what I will say at this point is I haven't modeled a car in about maybe 2 years. So if I do make any mistakes or double back, I'll try and highlight them the best that I can. But if you can just bear with me, we'll crack through here. So now that we have our arch, I think the next real thing to do is I'm going to grab the edges here, and I'm going to grab the outer portion of these edges. So we can see here on the main screen here that I've grabbed all those outer ones. I haven't grabbed the bottom or any of the inside ones. I'm going to hit Control E for the extrude option. You can also click that on the main poly modeling toolbar up here as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull straight out on this green arrow here. So this is on our kind of component view. So it's going to pull it all out relative to that edge, and we can see that what that's doing is that's creating this curve quite nicely for us. It's already sitting roughly in the right spot as we pull that out there. And then we want to see in our side view here, we obviously want to move this across. Now what I'm going to do is, rather than just pull on the blue arrow just in case, depending on the kind of normal position, I'm actually going to select the world option up here, so that we make sure that when we are pulling, we're pulling on the actual world axis rather than the component axis. And I'm just going to pull that on along the X on the red here. I'm just going to pull that roughly into the position here. Now the reason I'm going to do it like this is because I assume at this point that the back of the arch is matching roughly the same kind of distance as the front. So by doing this means it's going to pull roughly that same distance there. What we can see though in our blueprint here is that it does start to get a bit more severe at the top. So we can do that through editing our vertices as we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull it to about here, which is the kind of, we can see it's a much thicker line. We can also see here that we actually go off into a small straight edge as we come around here. So I'm going to give a little bit of space to do that. But before we do, I'm going to run around, double check here. And I think at this point here I'm going to hit Control E again to extrude. I'm going to grab that world option and I'm just going to extrude in ever so slightly, just so that we can kind of reflect that same portion here. So again, we're going to eyeball that the best we can because our blueprints aren't so clear. Now in doing so, what we can see now is that we can see that our curve isn't the best in some areas, so we can address that at this point. But also what we want to do is want to address the vertices up here. Now I pulled these points, I've extruded these points here at this point because we want to make sure that this gap is maintained the same throughout. As soon as we bring it over and start to bend it, it could be slightly different, probably won't be, but I'm just done it just now just to make sure that we're looking good there. So what I'm going to do is we are going to grab our option here. We're going to go for vertices. Firstly, I'm going to grab this point and I'm just going to pull that in a bit more so that curve's a little bit smoother, because we want our curves, even in our low poly versions, to be nice and smooth. We can also see that there are imperfections in some of these images where things don't quite line up properly, so we can obviously look through our reference images, see that's fairly common across most cars. We can add that in at a later date should we wish to. I am going to start to grab these points, so we can see up here that one's fine. We can see at this point here that we probably want to start moving in. So I'm going to grab this and just take that there. Up here we're going to get far more severe, so we're going to take that in too. Let's do these two at a time, something like that. And then obviously we're going to need to do the same at this back section. So I've got my reference images here, and I'm just going to gradually taper that off to that end section there. So we've got a nice working wheel arch here as well. Now the next step for me, what I like to do at this point here, is firstly, I probably could have done this a couple of steps ago, but I am going to hit Ctrl D to duplicate this, and I'm going to slide this off to the back of the car, because what we'll do is we'll use that as our starting point when it comes to the rear, because we've already done a lot of the work, so we'll just get that positioned nicely when we need to. Not just that, when it gets to that point we'll probably flip it so that this geometry here will match this geometry quite nicely there. Let's actually just do that now. Let me just center my pivot here, and what I'm also going to do, because we did rotate it ever so slightly, let's go for freeze transformations on that too, and I'm just going to grab it on the scale here. I'm going to scale it all the way through. I'm going to change it on the Z here to -1. So that means now that we know we've got the same amount of geometry that's going to run between these, we just need to edit them a little bit later to make sure that they're matching up nicely. So we won't worry about that too much just now. I am going to get my wireframes on these just so it makes it a little bit easier for me to see, but it should also make it a little bit easier for you to see too. In doing so, we use obviously a lot of the side view and the front view for this, but we can also double check at the top here. So again, we can go X-ray. We can double check to make sure that we're matching. We can see that we are on the front, but we aren't on the back. So what we'll do is we'll address that too. So we'll identify which vertices need to adjust. So we can see it's here. Let's go for this one too, out there. So we'll maybe get that one to match the body line, but what we've got to understand is that obviously we can't see the rest. So we're going to want this to do a nice little curve out. Maybe something like that. Just so that's nice and consistent on the way through. Okay, so next what we're going to need to do is we are going to be editing some of the lines that we actually have inside here. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to use the multi-cut tool here, and I'm going to create a new line off of this. I'm going to go straight along the line of the bumper there and hit enter, and then I'm just going to make sure that I follow that line along here too. So I'm going to click and then bring that up here. I don't think that quite. Again, this is a bit awkward because obviously the blueprints are so small. Let's do something like that. Okay, so we've had a little triangle here, but that's not a big deal just now. What that will allow us to do is that will allow us to cleanly take this edge along if we need to. Also, just pull that out ever so slightly, just so it's helping maintain that curve, and then we'll also want to do it here as well. Whenever we add any line of any kind, we want to make sure that we're following that curve nicely. If we don't, then that's where we can start to get some jagged edges and things. What we probably eventually may do is we may actually edit this geometry at some point, but what I like to do as we go is I like to make my mesh super basic, nice and easy for editing, and then let me just straighten stuff. Nice and easy for editing at a later date, because we will be obviously building a high poly model, but I like to lay down a nice low poly mesh first. So let's just get this in here there. Okay, so we're looking good there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to think about moving around the front bumper here. There's a few ways that we could do this. We could move straight off here and go in this direction. We could move up here and go in this direction as well. I think that would probably be the better option, to take this edge up, and the reason for that is because we're going to need multiple edges coming across here. So either those edges are going to have to flow up here. We can see that space gets quite small because our geometry will need to form up and along this section, or it's going to need to cut off into our arch, which we don't want. So I think what I'm going to do to start the bumper off here is I'm actually going to grab this edge. I'm going to hit Ctrl E. So we're going to be extruding a lot of stuff as part of this. We actually want to make sure that we're grabbing the correct edge. We want to grab this one here rather than the one that I did. I'm going to do this on the world. That's going to allow me to add some rotations in there as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one in here just to help maintain that corner, and I'm going to bring this one all the way up to the top here. And what we'll do is we'll edit these vertices. So I'm maybe going to take it to about halfway, and then for this vertices here, I'll maybe bring something like that for now. So we can see that that's going to roll up there. What we want to do as well in our front and top views, want to make sure that we're going kind of in the right direction for this, but we also need to remember that in our top view the car is going to continue forming up and around. So we're following this line here. So if I double check my references, it looks like we're going to be running to this point. So not the actual line where the hood or where the bonnet is. We're going to be going to the top of the wing there. So we'll move that there, that's fine. So it's this line here that we're moving to, so I'm going to grab these vertices and I'm going to use my front view here to put those into position. Both of those there. Now obviously we have a lot more curvature that we would need to add to this. At this point I'm not too fussed because that curvature is going to be going around this light here. So we can add that in at any point, but we don't want to go too crazy. We don't want to throw in a load of curves here because again they're going to need to run up and along this point. So we're going to want to make sure that anything we add to this is as minimal as possible. So I'm only going to want to put the key lines in first, and then after that we can think about what it is that we want to add in. We're also going to move along this bottom edge here, so I'm going to grab the correct line again, the inner one here. I'm going to hit Control E, and we'll bring this along here. And we're going to want to start to form the line down here, which goes for the grille, which I assume will obviously feed the radiator and things behind there. And again, we're going to want to make sure we're grabbing our points here. Let's go here. And we're going to want to pull those in on this axis too. And again, we've got a little bit more curvature in there, but we're not going to worry about that too much just now. One note to kind of finish on, obviously we haven't been able to model too much in this episode here, but one note just to finish on is that we want, as we go through here, to make sure that as we're building everything, we're building it absolute as basic as possible. It's probably going to be a case that it doesn't look very good for quite a long time, and then all of a sudden it will look very good. So don't worry if whenever you do your 3D modeling, especially of your cars and your hard surfaces, that if it's not looking how it should for quite some time, you know, as we add more geometry, as we add more details and things, it will be a little bit better. So don't worry too much about that. But I think for this episode we'll call it just there. We've made a little bit of a start in here. In the next episode what we'll do is we're going to run along here and we're going to probably complete the main structural elements, so kind of the front bumper, and we'll maybe get along the top of the headlight section here, we'll get along this section here, and we can start to think about the outline of the extrusions and things for the inner sections here as well. Alright guys, so if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, make sure you subscribe for all the new content as well. I will see you in the next one.